I'm glad you all came. At least I got somebody to read to. All right. As Dave said, the storm. Crash. 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 It was the only sound. All else was quiet except for the low of the wind, which was almost non-existent. Crash! It was the sound of the waves breaking on the beach, and then the runoff of the water, rushing back, receding back into the ocean. Excuse me. The sun was blinding in an empty sky, and it was hot. Not an animal moved in the heat. Then there came a puff of breeze. Soon there was another puff. It was not long before there was a steady, gentle breeze. Before long, it grew into a strong wind. A front had gone through. Now clouds started to form on the horizon, far out over the ocean. At first, they were barely visible to the unaided eye, or even to the aided eye. Had there been anyone there with or without an aid. The flora and fauna didn't seem to see it, or didn't need to see it. They could feel it. They felt the change in the air pressure, and they could smell the change in the air. There was a damp, wet smell, and a heavy, thick feel to the air. A storm was coming. As the storm moved closer, part of the storm took on an ugly green color. The clouds became heavier and blacker. At the same time, the wind grew stronger. After about an hour, or maybe a little longer, the clouds were over the land, and the first few raindrops fell. The storm had arrived. By this time, most of the animals that needed shelter or wanted it had entered their shelter. They were set for the blow. Now, too, the lightning started, beginning with a single loud crash. It struck between the clouds. Then another lightning strike, this time onto the land. A large tree had been hit, sending a flock of what seemed to be thousands of birds into the air. Part of the tree was knocked to the ground, or it would have been if it hadn't landed with its branches being supported by several adjacent trees. The wind speed kept increasing. The rain was now coming in torrents, creating a deluge on the ground and driving many of the smaller denizens climbing into the trees, or running to find higher ground out of the water. By now the lightning was almost continuous. Frequently it hit the trees and started many small fires. Because the rain was so heavy, it quickly put out most of the tree fires, and the wet ground stopped the rest. Then the sun came out, the wind speed dropped, and the rain stopped. The birds started to sing, and the animals started to move again. It seemed the storm was all over, until it started again. The cloud cover returned. The rain started again. The wind seemed to blow even harder. The lightning was even more furious, and the birds and animals headed for shelter again. It seemed like days later, but was actually only hours when the sun shone. It was the morning after the storm. During the night, the rain and lightning had moved away, and the wind had calmed to a breeze. There were many damaged nests, flooded burrows, bent and broken trees, a few injured, and a few dead animals. However, most of the animals had come through with only a scare. They had survived another hurricane. He said we had 5 minutes to talk, so I'm going to take another minute or two. Many people have asked me, and this is as much for your benefit as anything else, how do you think of something to write? What I usually do is I look around the room I'm in, and I'll see a coat hook, and then I'll say, what could I possibly write about a coat hook? You hang coats on it. What else? It's screwed to the wall. Can I make a story out of this somehow? And I go from there. Or I might pick the clock back there. What can I tell about that clock? Is there anything special about that clock? Are the hands visible easily? Can you watch them move? Well, I can see the second hand moving on that one, so it's quite visible. But this is the way I go about it most of the time, but not all the time. Sometimes I just pick something and go with it. As Dave said, I spent a lot of time on boats. Thank you for the storms. But we don't always go through hurricanes either. However, I didn't spend all my life on the boats. I spent part of it working on water towers around various towns, all the way from up north ways in Wisconsin and that, all the way down to Texas. And usually I did the safety work in this, but that's the basis for my stories, and I thank you very much for having your patience with me.